screen share and we will start up here in a second.
Deborah, your last name is F-R... Oh, okay, there's a P at the end. Yep, there's a P at the end.
H-R-I-E-P, yep.
Thank you.
Welcome everyone who is joining us now. We will be starting in a few minutes. Please sign on in the chat. Tell us where you're listening in from, and we'll be starting here with a quick poll to begin the talk. Welcome from Panama. Hi.
Panama, nice.
Marisol, how did you hear about this? I'd love to know. And also, if you're joining us on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, feel free to add comments in any of those platforms. I will make sure they get to the stream and the panelists for you to ask and answer questions. So thanks a ton. We'll be started here in just a second.
I like the poll in progress.
Yeah, we have a lot of people responding here in the poll right now. A lot of people from the design community, some from UX, project managers, some from the disabled community. It's great. Happy to see everyone here. We hope that we have a great talk here for you coming up. Welcome Anne from Warren and William from West Virginia. Thanks for coming. Happy to get everyone from all across the country going. This is a part of the Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So it's not something that's just Detroit related, but something that affects everyone all around. And also, if you're joining us on any of the other stream sources, I will also make sure to post a link to the Zoom call so you can join us here and ask questions directly, respond to the chat and everything. So look for that on your comments.
Are you okay if I say co-presented?
Go for it. All right, so it is 6:30. So Christina, would you like to kick us off here? And I think we'll have some people start to filter in as the hour goes on. So yeah. I'll kick it over to Christina.
Okay, so in the chat, could you just put if it's too distracting having the poll open, or do you not see the poll and only I do?
I think that will, if they answer the poll, they can close it on their phones.
Okay, I'm gonna keep it open in the corner because it's moving real time. So we'll get back to that in just a couple of minutes. So hello everybody, welcome. Happy Global Accessibility Awareness Day, yay, GAD. Thanks to Dylan Box, president of AIGA, for making this event possible, and our two ASL interpreters, Elise Zepke and Deb Froreep, and to our four panelists who are here with us tonight, who we will introduce in just a few minutes. So if you could just put in the chat where you're from, state, region, what have you, we'd love to see where you're coming from. And then also curious how you found out. So if you could share that as well, that would be great. And I'll kind of read some of these. We have Marisol from Panama, Anne from Warren, Michigan, William from West Virginia, Hope from Chicago. We've got Ann Arbor, Grand Rapids, Minneapolis, Rochester Hills, Michigan, Detroit. Found out yesterday, awesome, thanks for being here. Macomb, Michigan, Northville, Michigan, Austin, Texas.
See John Yablonsky in there, who also helped us out with another AIGA Zoom chat. So thanks for coming around to this one too.
Jen! Went to grad school with Jen. Go Jen. Amazing, talented woman.
Great, and welcome Tom as well. Happy to have you here on the panel too. Let me know if you need any help with your mic and anything.
Yep, can you hear me?
Yep, you're all good.
Great. So I apologize for my little tiny picture there. My video is kind of goes in and out. So rest assured I'm still here, but you might not get to see me in real time.
Well, happy to have you, even if it's just a small picture.
Okay.
Cool. Great. So I think we're good to go.
Okay.
Let's start off.
So we're going to get started. We're expecting more people. We'll see. It's the end of the day. People have had a lot of learning probably already with GAD today. So I'm just going to post in the chat the overview of everybody's names. You kind of know who people are. Tonight's panelists are Will, Tom, Mark, and Nazreen. We have our two interpreters, Elise and Deborah. Myself moderating, Christina, and Dylan, the co-presenter from AIGA Detroit. So I'm just going to go over the poll for a sec. So we've got about 6% from automotive. We've 62% from design, lots of design. We have 35% next research. We have 6% from product manager, product owner, project management. We've got 9% software and coding community, 6%, learner and curious, 9%, other 11. And for the multiple choice, we've got 43% visual, 9% hearing, 14% motor, 3% speech, 23% cognitive, and 43% other. And we got about 81% of the people voting. I'll leave it open before I post those results, just a little bit longer. All right. So, as I said, I'm Christina Rudolph. I'm an accessibility advocate and human-centered designer, and tonight's moderator for the accessibility panel discussion. Dylan Box is president of AIGA, and the two of us have put this panel together for all of you tonight. Ironically, with COVID, it had to be an online format. We actually had a really hard time finding a truly ADA accessible space in the greater downtown Ann Arbor, Detroit region that included accessible bathrooms and didn't depend on elevators because, you know, that's always wary, or, you know, had remote parking. So it's pretty interesting that this all worked out for the better. So good things coming out of COVID, I guess. I'm going to spend about 2 minutes to share some things. So Americans with disabilities make up 26% of the population. This is 2018 data from the CDC. I'll just post that. That's 61 million people. 13.7, so slightly more than half, experience mobility difficulties. And 4.6 are blind or severe low vision. So, you know, when we're designing for user interfaces and people online, there are a lot of mobility issues as well as vision and many other things, as you can see the community that we're representing in the poll here, which I will end. So you can see that result. we're all humans. Some of you here tonight have yet to experience what life is like for some other people here. Some of you are trying to design for these lifestyles without actually literally having the empathy of what that human experience is like. It's our job of the designers or the user experience researchers or advocates, product owners, developers, user interface designers to make this stuff accessible by asking open-ended questions and gaining insight. It's important that we establish a common language and understand and address the lifestyle needs of everyone. What if I told you here tonight that your life would never be the same again because of unforeseen circumstances? This could happen to you, and we will hear from a few panelists whose lives are both changing gradually, incrementally, and change drastically with the blink of an eye. So with us here tonight, we have Will Purvis, Mark Himes, Tom Hotlin, and Nizreen Salka. All of these people are accessibility advocates like myself. Some of them are in the shoes of daily challenges, while others are here to represent those shoes. Our goal tonight is to celebrate GAD, Global Accessibility Awareness Day, to gain real empathy and understanding so we can be better informed designers and advocates. So for tonight's panel discussion, we'll be focusing on the category of what this looks like in the world of mobility in and around the design of vehicles and transportation. So everything that we're going to be talking about today is going to be kind of in that wheelhouse. Whether passionate or intrigued, it's our hope that we deliver more understanding to the community at large and how you can help be better formed designers and advocates. So tonight, Will and Tom are from the Ann Arbor Center for Independent Living, AACIL, where their mission is to empower the lives of people with disabilities and to advocate for a more inclusive community for all. Will is the Director of Planning and Program Management Development for the AACI. AACIL. Will developed disability awareness training, allowing people to experience disability awareness through various cognitive, physical, and social disability exercises. Hopefully he'll be able to talk a little bit about that tonight. He has been a Michigan native since 1992 after living and working in Colorado, New Hampshire, and Wisconsin. He's earned various degrees in various levels: anthropology, geography, urban planning, and gaming and simulation design. In 2000, he was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa and has steadily lost his vision. Tom is the Director of Business and Benefactor Development at AACIL and also facilitates disability awareness workshops. He is paraplegic from the chest down, and there's a story with that, which I think he'll be sharing with us in just a few minutes. Mark is the program coordinator for the Livingston Center for Independent Living, the LCIL. He is a Livingston County Transportation Steering Committee member and the manager of movelive.org. And I'm going to put that address here in the chat. You can look at that later. He is also an Abilities Alliance community leader. Mark is vision impaired with a need to zoom in to navigate websites and apps, changing the way screen-based content is consumed. And then last but not least, saving the best for last, Nizreen Salka is a former product designer for Ford and worked with mobility analytics products and services. She is currently a team leader and UX and content strategist for Quicken Loans. She has an MSI of human-computer interaction from University of Michigan and a BBA from Stephen M. Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. So now that I've introduced everyone, we'll get started in that same order. And we're going to start kind of first going over anything else that people want to add from our panel here. And then we'll get into a few questions about support and mobility. And then we'll open the second half of everything up to audience questions. So please use the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. It is on the very far right center of your screen. And if you can use that, if you are unable to use that, you can use the chat, but please, if you can, use the Q&A because Dylan and I will be using the chat to post links, resources, and to continue to make things accessible to everyone during the panel. Okay, so we'll start with Will here. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Please explain the circumstances and details surrounding your exposure to disability and how it's changed your life kind of before transitioning and now, and how has your empathy for you and others changed? So physical surroundings and navigating the digital landscape.
So it's, as you said in the introduction, my experience with disability has been a gradual one. I've always had, so ever since I was little, I've had poor vision and was diagnosed with a degenerative retinal condition in 2000, as you mentioned. And it has deteriorated ever since, and then has been compounded with 4 or 5 other visual, retinal, corneal issues that affect my vision in a wide variety of ways. And in terms of the empathy you said for myself and others.
Yeah, so one thing I'm noticing, right, you're using a different method, right? You're in a vertical orientation right now as far as user interfaces go.
Yeah, but I could turn my phone on its side and then it would look the other way.
But you didn't.
But I didn't.
Just like all the people that take pictures, right? They don't, like when they take video, they don't actually turn it into landscape.
Yeah, it's I'm using my phone. I use my phone for most video conferencing applications because the interface is a lot cleaner. The phone gets a lot brighter. There's a lot less visual clutter in terms of sort of the core experience that I'm looking for and expect. So I guess empathy-wise, I think my work with the Center for Independent Living and in education, I mean, everyone's bringing their own experience into this, and I think if people are going to take anything away, it's not to assume that one person's experience is going to be a substitute for or the answer for everyone else. And so designing, I've done a lot of different, worked on a lot of different design projects, never in graphic design, but I think the critical piece for me is that to be prepared to constantly be prepared to shift your expectations and be prepared to shift your parameters. No, I don't know if that answers your question.
It's open to interpretation.
Okay.
Okay. Tom, did you want the questions again or? Oh, you're on mute.
I muted because my dog was barking out the window. So I have worked at the Center for Independent Living collectively for about 23 years. And I sort of grew up with my disability at the CIL, meaning that very early on after my injury, I took a peer mentor training class back in 1993 or 4. And, it was to sort of certify us to be peer mentors. And once I took that class and met other people with cross disability, I just knew it was a sort of a welcoming place for folks to come and feel comfortable and be able to have a place, have a gathering place where people look like they did, and we're able to sort of, be free of judgment and to find, peers and to, begin to learn how to self-advocate. And it just, Ann Arbor is a great community for people with disabilities, just because of, number one, attitudes, but also it's a very accessible town with great transportation and housing opportunities, et cetera. And then the University of Michigan is world-class in care, and they have a great physical medicine department. So, but my first career was in hotel management. That was my formal training. My first, the first degree that I earned was in hotel and restaurant management. And after working in hotels and managing for about 10 years, I unfortunately at the last hotel I was at the Comfort Inn in Livonia, Michigan in 1991, a couple men came in and robbed the hotel, and I was shot in the base of the neck to eliminate a witness. But as you can see, I survived, and I spent 6 months at University of Michigan Hospital learning how to sort of do everything all over again, but also more importantly, meeting a peer mentor there that came from the Center for Independent Living. And it just opened my eyes to the fact that I was sort of struck by the fact that this guy, he was quadriplegic and he was happy and he had a family and a job and he drove, and it just I didn't know how anyone could be happy with a spinal cord injury and having to use a wheelchair. And that was, just showing my ignorance, because I had never been around folks that had spinal cord injuries and was dealing with paralysis. But it's sort of, and like I said, I learned at the CIL when I came there a couple years later that the CIL was a place where we didn't really focus on the sadness or the tragedy of disability. Rather, we celebrated it as a normal part of life. And I learned very quickly that we were moving forward at the CIL and sort of helping folks become independent versus helping folks with what they needed. We were and we still are the the one-stop shop for everything independent. And no matter what your level of disability is, you still have a voice in how you want to be seen and how you want to work with folks and how you want to be assisted, et cetera. And so, I took that motto about celebrating disability all through my career. And that's why disability awareness is one of my passions because my family and I were struck by the attitudinal barriers that existed then and still exist today. Whereas, we feel invisible sometimes, that people sort of look around us, over us, and through us, and don't include us in conversations or even a gesture of hello going down the street or the sidewalk. And that's something that I want to change. I want people to understand that, disability is not that complicated. And the fear that we hear when folks say, oh, I think it's about fear. People don't know how to approach you or what to call you or how to act around you. And that makes me chuckle now, because we just want people to treat us the same way that they're treating their other peers. And so that's why disability awareness is really my passion. And so I think that answers the question, I think, about the empathy. I sort of had the peer mentoring program that we have at the hospital. And so we meet all the new patients with spinal cord injuries and their families. And I can't even tell you how many people I've met and mentored with over the years. But, I think we're right in the trenches of meeting folks at the onset of this catastrophic injury. And, we know exactly, not exactly, but we know some of the feelings that they're going through right at that moment. And I think that, the perspective that we offer both in resources and sort of psychosocial adjustment is invaluable to the patients and their families.
Thank you for sharing.
Yep.
Okay. Changes are hard as it is, but changes like that overnight, yeah, that's a lot. Okay, so let's lead into Mark.
Hello. And then another thing that we should kind of get ahead of here is that the Livingston Center for Independent Living is affiliated with the Ann Arbor Center. So they're kind of the head, and we're kind of a satellite out here in Livingston County. Could you please repeat that question again? I apologize.
So explain the circumstances and details surrounding your exposure to disability and how it's changed your life, kind of the before, transitioning, and now. Mm-hmm. And how has your empathy changed your physical surroundings and navigating the digital landscape?
Okay, so I actually was born with my visual impairment. It wasn't as progressed as it is now, of course. Retinitis pigmentosa is very slow progressing in some people, especially if you're, I believe, born with it. So throughout the year, apologize again, my dog's in the background, but everybody has that. So pretty much that my experience kind of just growing up was normal. I was sort of integrated with everybody else in the community, and it was just kind of interesting to see kind of where, as I got older, that I noticed that I needed more accommodations, more things that that needed to sort of come together to where I could fully be operational with the diminishing conditions that I've been having, and getting involved with different types of adaptive technology. And like you said in the description, where I blow up my screen on my computer, I didn't know how to do that until pretty much I was in college, and I thought it would be extra useful to have that in my earlier years. But growing and like continuing on, I got a degree in actually geology, which is highly visual science. And it wasn't until after I graduated when I found out there wasn't that many opportunities for a visually impaired geologist to go into, especially out in the field. That would be very dangerous. I kind of switched focus, and I was working with a career developer at that point in time, and they helped me understand kind of my goal in life. And it was to serve other individuals with visual impairments and blindness. And at that point, it just dove into the entire world of just learning about different, just different eye conditions and different things that have affected other people with vision loss and blindness. And I actually started out as a peer mentor for the University of Michigan for the Kellogg Eye Center. And at that point, I was developing my own motivational speaking business and coaching business where I would help other individuals. It didn't expand into other other groups of disabled individuals as well until I met one of the individuals from the Ann Arbor Center for Independent Living. And at that point, I was working up in Livingston County, helping in one of the work groups, just kind of getting myself out there to get noticed and to get with the program, or to get with the Abilities Alliance up there. And at that point, I assisted some of the staff members in the Ann Arbor office for the Ann Arbor. They did a survey with the Livingston Center to understand and identify the differences in needs and the gaps in needs in the county. So we worked together for that, and actually I'm coming up on my 1-year anniversary with working with the Livingston Center for Independent Living, of course, affiliated with the Ann Arbor Center. So my world of just blindness and visual impairments actually grew to encompass other disabilities as well. And that opened my eyes to just kind of the vast variations and differences in different types of disabilities, and thinking about those other things like ESL interpreter, or a sign language interpreter, or even closed captioning on Zoom, of course. I learned that one fairly recently as well. So, and also too with adaptive technologies and differences in the user interfaces with online technology that we have now been so more accustomed to using, compared to when we were previously meeting in person and people are just handing out printouts and whatnot. So it's been like more of a journey, but it's also been I probably just expanded my brain more so than I probably have, in my entire previous life before what I've been doing here. So it's learning that, and the empathy that I've gained and just understood, and it's if you ask, people usually will help you out, and I feel that people are fairly empathetic in this world, which I'm really excited about. So I don't know, I hope that answered, but I talk a lot to you sometimes.
No, that definitely answered. Okay, Nazreen, you're up. Did you want me to repeat?
No, I'm good, but
Okay.
I just wanted to say hi and thank you for having me on this panel. I'm really excited to speak to everybody today. So my first real exposure to disability really wasn't until later in my life, and my grandmother had a stroke and lost the use of the right side of her body. And it was at that point that I really realized like the importance not only of adaptive technologies and keeping her social life intact at that age, but also learning to understand like the idea of like independence and dignity for those with disabilities that I feel like they aren't necessarily given as much as they should. And so this event in my life, this personal event, happened to coincide with actually my work at the time, and I started looking at the work I was doing completely differently. So I work in the field of user experience. And at the time, I was working with Ford Motor Company on their Go Ride project. Essentially, Go Ride was a service that was a non-emergency medical service. So we would go and pick up patients from their homes and drop them off at hospitals or dialysis centers or wherever they needed to receive care, and then later pick them up at the end of their appointment and return them to their homes. And at first, I saw them as just like any other user. And it was only after experiencing that event with my grandmother that I realized the importance of accommodating the other needs of our users, more so as just like not just through the technology, but actually through the training of our drivers, the way we handle data and how we algorithmically route all of our vehicles to our different patients' homes, depending on their needs, and trying to get a much more specialized view into how we can integrate accessibility into the very core of what our services were. And so it's something that I've now carried throughout my career. After leaving the Go Ride project and joining Quicken Loans, I had the opportunity to connect with our senior accessibility specialist, Olia. I actually believe she's in the attendance today. She is absolutely fantastic, and being able to work with her and learning more about not just using discovery research methods to better understand the needs of our disabled users and customers, but also using like validation testing methods such as usability testing and integrating it across our platforms, regardless of who our target users are. It's been an amazing experience to be exposed to that at Quicken Loans as well. So two very different industries, two very different sets of users, and all the same, we're having this common thread of trying to make accessibility a true priority. So I guess that's more of a very much career focus on accessibility as opposed to a personal one. But I hope that through advocates such as my fellow panelists today, we can find a way to meet their needs better every day.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. So as you can see, we have a wide breadth of people, both representing the community from personal, physical and visual experiences to experiences where working within those realms with people. Okay, great answers, everybody. Thank you so much. I'm really curious, we're really curious to the hurdles or wins with app-related rideshare technology. So let's talk about that for just a couple of minutes here. We'll get everybody's input in that. Things like the user interactions, this doesn't necessarily have to be with just the rideshare portion, but it could be with interactions inside of vehicles, the screens being used inside the vehicles, how you're navigating these environments, both with the mobility and the user interfaces, the UIs, or the user experiences, the UX of these technologies. So I'd love to hear just everybody take a couple of minutes and talk about kind of those hurdles and wins related to both rideshare and the interfaces, either to get the rideshare or the interfaces within the vehicles. Does that make sense for everybody? Nod if that makes sense. Okay.
Yep.
All right. If you need me, I can repeat. All right, Will, you want to start again?
Sure. So, I mean, this is an area that I've worked a lot on through over the last few years in terms of app development and mobility as a service. And we actually did work with Go Ride briefly 2 years ago on a project. But in terms of the hurdles and wins, I guess for myself, the from a probably the biggest hurdles are using the app in a situation where there's where I can't see the screen. So having some sort of voice control with the app is a big hurdle for me sometimes. In a low light environment where I can enlarge the screen and look at particular parts of it, then it makes more sense for me. And then another hurdle is the, and this is particularly related to Lyft and Uber. Another hurdle would be identifying the vehicle when it arrives, and the accuracy of for the driver to identify where I am, and for me to identify the vehicle itself, so that the markers that rideshare services typically use are things like license plate, make and model of car, and things like that, which are inaccessible to me. And then I guess the wins would be working with Lyft to get grant monies for individuals with disabilities to have discounted and free rides under certain conditions, under some of the grants that they've done through their community outreach programs. And so that's been really helpful. I guess some other wins have been app developers over the last couple of years reaching out more to the CIL and other disability advocates to consult with and talk about design and UI UX kinds of questions. So those would be, I think the wins are more, the wins are in a different sort of realm than the hurdles are, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So following up from that, what would be a more acceptable way for you to engage with that vehicle when it arrives? How would you know that that is your vehicle?
So I think one of them is there's a number of discontinuities in the between myself, the app, and the driver. And the interfaces that we use are different, so that I've indicated in my user profile, for instance, that I'm visually impaired. And there's not, the only option is visually impaired with dog. I don't use a seeing eye dog. I don't use a service dog. I use a white cane. But that information in my profile isn't communicated to the driver. And so the other disjunction is that I'm entering in an address where they pick me up, for example. So if I'm entering in 218 North 4th, they are on their app, they're looking at a GPS person or marker on a screen, and that's not nearly as accurate. So they may be down the street. And so having a more precise communication between myself and the driver would be helpful. I also can't use the call or text the driver once I'm outside, as I mentioned, because of the lighting situation. And so those features, contacting the driver, if they're waiting for me, I get the ping, but I can't navigate the app to actually contact the driver.
Thank you.
Yep.
So in the situation where you're a passenger, are there things that you are interfacing within the vehicle that are also different points of interest
In
for
Um,
usability?
in a rideshare situation?
Or being a passenger in a vehicle of a friend or
Um, it's no, because it's just finding the seatbelt holder and then just sitting there. So it's relatively straightforward.
okay. Fair enough.
I don't have a whole lot to do.
When he, when he rides with me, he holds on for dear life.
Exactly.
Nice.
Well, I was actually going to say, when it comes to accessibility within the vehicle, whenever GoRide picked up wheelchair passengers, we had a very different loading and unloading structure, right? Like in terms of helping
Yep.
the patient board the vehicle versus a walking patient. And so that actually changed the algorithmic structure powering that service, so that we would always pick up wheelchair passengers first. And if they were sharing a ride with another rider, that could create a less equitable experience for them, because they have to wait as we pick up the next rider on the way to their final destination. So it's often like forcing wheelchair riders to pool with other riders, who, if they are more able-bodied, are having that shorter drive time. And so when we actually looked at the data and found that out, we tried different ways of loading in wheelchair passengers to make sure that we could actually help them board the vehicle without creating that inequity in how we were picking up people and in what order. So it's interesting that you point that out, because just this different ways that people can enter a vehicle, especially if it's
Yep.
accessible to those in wheelchairs, can like really dramatically change not just like the vehicle itself, but the actual algorithm that's powering that rideshare service. So kind of interesting.
And I think that also I think it's interesting. GoRide is such a great example because it's the economic sort of structure behind it. The funding mechanism for it is based on medical trips. And
Yeah.
so for myself, if I had, a doctor's appointment or something, that trip might be covered by insurance. If I'm going to get groceries, then I would have to find another way of getting around. So I think in terms of accessibility, there's a huge income and socioeconomic
Oh, definitely.
issue as well. So that, I'm in a, fortunate position to have disposable income where I can use Lyft and Uber, when I need to get someplace in an expedient fashion. But I also use our community rideshare system, and that's it's much cheaper, but it's also much slower and much less efficient, as Nazreen was saying, like in terms of, because it's a shared service. So trips take longer.
Right.
And, sometimes that's fine. I can check email and talk on the phone and do other things along the way. But other times, if you need to be someplace at a particular time, there aren't a lot of good options.
Tom, Mark, do you want to chime in?
Go ahead, Mark.
I echo a lot of what Will says, especially when I was in Chicago just in February. We were trying to find the Lyft, and Chicago blocks their quarter mile, right? So so we were on the corner of Michigan and oh gosh, I forget the street name itself, but over by the water tower building, and they're just on the complete opposite end of the street on the other like quarter mile down the road, because they couldn't find a place to park. So we were trying to communicate with the driver, because they called us because I couldn't text them, because again, outside and texting is not very user friendly even when you try to do any text to speech to ask your phone to text somebody, and that's been difficult. So once they called me, we figured it out. However, the language barrier again, which sometimes can get in the way, got in our way, but we were able to sort of meet halfway and navigate and find the car itself. And I mean, pretty much everybody has either a silver, white, or black car, so it makes it even more difficult to find them. And so that's like usually a hurdle. But the other hurdle is too, actually living in Livingston County, is our transportation system. Paratransit, it's very affordable, but again, it's going to take you quite a while to get somewhere. And even when they are loading on and off somebody who is in a wheelchair or using like a walker or something to get up on the lift and stuff, I feel at least more so now, because I feel like they're doing a good service, because they're actually not using just one giant bus to transfer one person. They're actually trying to split it up and have other people, be on those buses as well, so they can save on the gas and mileage, and also time too, in some senses. If you're, it's one driver doing 3 or 4 individual trips compared to one trip with 3 or 4 individuals on the in the ride. So I think that's it's something I've come to appreciate more so, especially being part of the transportation coalition up here as well too, and making sure that we, are transportation sufficient. And I think there's only probably one Lyft driver in the county right now, so that's not extremely efficient either. So
True.
one day we hope to have some type of on-demand type service, but it's not quite there just yet. That's one thing I loved when I lived in Ann Arbor, was just the immediate on-demand service that you can get. And I travel with a service dog now, and he's a really great companion, but sometimes you can run into issues with room, or if it's a van and there's 3 other passengers in it, it's a very tight fit for us sometimes. So we try to be as flexible as possible in those situations. I guess if I'm generally a passenger in some type of automobile, usually with my wife, we're going somewhere or whatever, I manage the GPS. So I actually update her before the GPS does the voice update, just to make sure that that we're going the right way, or there's so I kind of navigate that for us, and it really takes the stress of that navigation off of her and off of the driver. So it really makes things more easier. And with being able to zoom in on apps and screens, it's really helped out a lot. And so adaptive technology in that aspect has been good. And once accessibility makes blown up font on a screen not cut off, that'll be a good day. But right now that's kind of difficult.
Right.
There's some things on there that are good, and others that you have to navigate around and adapt to. I'm pretty adaptable, at least I try to be.
Mark, do you notice that happening on a lot of apps, or are there particular ones that are better or worse than others about respecting those sort of increases in size?
Yeah, so I mean, there are of course some apps, when you increase your font, they won't do it. They won't be compatible with that algorithm, I guess you would call it. But the ones that do, like we're taking the South Shore connector to get from Michigan City to Chicago for the trip that we were doing. The font would be blown up. It would be the right size, but the words would be cut off. So like it would say like station, you know, it's supposed to be like station, Millennium Station or whatever, and it's just like Milen, and then, you know, the rest is cut off. So it's you have to sort of know a little bit about the stations or what you're looking at ahead of time, because of that kind of truncation that happens with the increasing the fonts.
Yeah, so for those viewers who don't know, a nice way of kind of piloting what this looks like, you know, there's nothing obviously completely comparable, but you can also do things like what's called a straw test, where you actually take your hand and you make a letter O with your hand, and until it's very, very small, and you look through your eye and you can only see part of a screen. And that's somewhat akin to the same scenario. I mean, obviously you can also zoom in on your screen size as well, but having that limited view.
You can also use paper towel tubes.
Paper towel tubes, yes. Toilet paper tubes, if you have any.
Toilet paper tubes.
Commodities these days.
Those are just such great examples to help people without those disabilities better understand what it looks like, what it feels like. So even when we don't necessarily have the access we need to advocates like you, we can still try to mimic something similar within like our lab environment or our work environment, and try to design around that as well. So I actually never heard of the paper towel tube trick. Like, that's fantastic.
So I'm curious to hear from Tom and his impressions, and then I would love if the two of you would go into the empathy labs as well.
So I have to say that I have, you know, I'm grateful and blessed to have had my own vehicle, my own accessible vehicle for, you know, the duration of my disability. But I will say that I've watched my colleagues at the CIL, and especially Will, because we were office mates for a good amount of time, just in the dance that is what I call it, of getting from point A to B, is just so much more of a challenge than the independence that I have. And then I'll also say that I realize that when I go out of town, either on business or vacation, when I don't have my vehicle and have to rely on taxis and Uber and Lyft, and it's you know, spontaneity is out the window. You have to plan everything a day in advance, and I'm not a big planner, and so Will's chuckling. But you know, that's difficult, because you can't just decide one night, if you don't have a vehicle, let's go to the movie or let's go out to eat. And so, you know, you lose that sort of independence and that privilege of being spontaneous. So, and then the other thing I can speak to personally myself is, you know, I'll be with a group of people and everyone's able-bodied but me. And, you know, it's going to take an hour to get a van there, a van taxi that has a ramp that I could go up into. So everybody's just like, let's just take a cab, you know, we'll help you out. And that's sort of stressful for me, because I don't do it enough. It's not easy enough for me to, you know, pull up next to a Lyft, an Uber car or a Lyft or a taxi, and transfer into the seat, and then you know, tear my chair apart and make sure that that's not going to be damaged, and so forth. So I do see both ends, and I do see, you know, the privilege of you know, sort of having my own vehicle, and the contrast of when all of a sudden you don't have one, and you're sort of vulnerable to public transportation, and the sort of the pros and the cons that come with that. All of a sudden, things are sort of coming alive in my own life that, you know, my colleagues go through every single day, and I don't take that for granted. The challenges that they have compared to the independence that I do. So I offer rides whenever I can to you know, the folks that I see are challenged.
That's true. He does.
Yeah, I don't know if that helps.
I'm
provide a
sure
kind-
they think so.
It definitely helps.
Yeah.
I also want to, you had mentioned public transit, and I just want to briefly share this this experience that came up today during the DDOT, the Detroit Department of Transportation community meeting. Larry Verse, who is who's from the People's Platform for Transit Justice team, was having some concerns about people and their ability to board on the buses now with the changes that are happening due to the coronavirus. They're now doing boarding in the back of the bus in order to protect drivers, but as many people know, the front of the bus is where a lot of the ADA compliant ramps and things are. And there was a lot of concern about, you know, who's checking to make sure that people have access to ADA compliant boarding options when the drivers won't be able to get up because they might be behind a plexiglass screen now, or, you know, they have to board in a part of the bus that won't allow them on. We're severely limiting people's transportation and accessibility at the expense of, you know, health and safety of other people too. So it's a really hard game to play.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where solutions like the autonomous wheelchair restraint systems that have been piloted, we've worked on piloting those and evaluating those in the Ann Arbor Transit Authority buses, are really handy because they don't require especially in light of COVID, they don't require a human to strap a wheelchair in. The chair backs into the space, and then the arms grab the chair. And so it doesn't require, the driver can stay seated up front. So those kinds of, the movement towards those kinds of autonomous systems within vehicles, and then obviously longer term down the road, autonomous vehicles and the kinds of algorithms and that Nazreen is working on, you know, are going to make a big difference eventually.
So would you talk a little bit about the empathy workshops that you do and the kind of exercises that are involved in those to get people to kind of
yeah, so we try to they're called disability awareness trainings. So we try to steer away a little bit from empathy as the goal. Well, we want people to be aware of it, and they're designed for professionals, adults in nonprofits, businesses, and we walk people through. So Tom and I have done a number of these together, and then we've also worked with Phoenix Mobility on developing the disability awareness trainings. We've worked with a number of engineering firms and engineering automotive firms, but what we architecture firms and others. So what we try to do is help sort of work with the participants to help them understand disability in kind of 8 different areas. And then through discussion and reflection, folks will have conversations and explore the intersections of disability in their own work. And so it becomes an exploration of how disability interacts with automotive design or law and legal access, or teaching and learning. So it really depends on it's very, it's often a really rich conversation because it's very, it becomes very personal and very specific to the jobs and roles of the people who are in the trainings. And people go through, like I said, 9 or 8 different stations, exercises that are designed to approximate sort of some big kind of buckets of disability. So mobility it is with, we have a wheelchair. What's it like to navigate with a wheelchair? What's it like to navigate with a white cane? What's it like to use a walker or cane? And then cognitive disabilities, deaf and hard of hearing, and mental illness as well. So those are some of them. And I don't know, is there anything specific you'd want to?
Well, I think, you know, having done one of those with you guys, so just go through the different examples. Like you had the wiggle pen and some of those other things, the mirror where you're trying to write, and just kind of give people a sense of that. And then also, if you can share that in the chat with people who might want to look into Empathy Labs with their companies, or if they have interest in it too, that would be great.
Yeah, so maybe if Tom, I can't, it's difficult for me to access the chat simultaneously, but Tom, maybe you can type in disability awareness training and then put either your email or my email up there.
Okay. Under the Q&A.
Tom, I can put that in there.
Okay.
Don't worry.
We can transfer it into the chat. So yeah,
you get sort of you get a microcosm here of how Tom and I shared an office.
why don't you talk about some of those specifics for those workshops?
Tom, do you want to talk about the wheelchair piece that you did with in Grand Rapids or in Ann Arbor?
Yes. So obviously I use a wheelchair, so I know a little bit about navigating and so forth. So I like doing the wheelchair obstacle course with, we do it, we do children, 4th graders in the Ann Arbor School District, but it's funny the contrast between how kids see getting in a wheelchair and navigating a obstacle course when we give the very same course to adults. It's the complaining is so much more, it's humorous to see the contrast between acceptance and what the kids are willing to try, and adults will, you know, just get right up out of the chair because they can't get up a ramp. And they'll get up and push the chair up to the top and try the door, not from a seated position, but you know, I love doing that. And there's, you know, between adults, there's some competition in it, who can make it up the ramp and who can open up a door and from a seated position. And Will's right. We don't, we sort of get away from the term empathy, but that's exactly what it is when someone is sort of on a ramp and trying to open a door at the same time. Once they get the door open, keeping it open and scooting in is very, very difficult. And it's difficult if you've never, more difficult if you've never done it. And so I think it really makes an impact on folks. a lot of things that they don't think about. But you know what, when Will was talking about some of the different stations that they go to, I'm always struck by people's experiences with these workshops. And you know, we've seen people get very emotional when they've been blindfolded and are sort of challenged to use a cane to go forward. And they're just, you know, we don't try to frighten anyone or you know, it's not our intention to you know, evoke fear, but that is it's very emotional for folks, both that and also when the experience for mental health, the experience that the simulation is to put headphones on and you know, it's they'll hear things that go through someone's mind that has schizophrenia or somebody struggling with bipolar, and they just had absolutely no idea, especially when a transit operator like a bus driver listens to those recordings. They had no idea that their passengers are you know, possibly experiencing these the voices in their heads and the different ideations that they go through. And so it is a very hands-on human experience that people leave those workshops changed. You know, the feedback that we get from these folks are that they're life-changing for them in understanding disability in a whole new light. And so, yes, there's the wiggle pen that simulates someone with limited hand function. There's, you know, goggles for someone to experience a visual impairment versus being completely blind. And, you know, exercises where, you know, we put mittens on someone and have them pick up goldfish crackers with the mittens on, so they understand what it might be like to be a quadriplegic with no pinch in their fingers to pick things up. I think you know, that cross experience of all those different disabilities are very, very effective and profound.
Yeah, I remember being a part of your group, and people were trying to wayfind to get into the bathroom, and even if you had the button to press, you couldn't, like, it wouldn't open long enough for you to be able to actually go in. And then there was the struggle with the door and then closing the door, and then when you went to wash your hands, there was a trash can in the way. So you couldn't fully get under there. And then I also remember with the group that it was for cognitive focus, we had mirrors set up and there were math problems. And I remember that there were a few people just getting very frustrated, not being able to even if they knew what the numbers were, to write them in the right spot, because it was like 423 plus, you know, 25 or something, and they had to be able to carry the numbers and write it in the right spot from left to right, but everything was mirrored. So to give those experiences was pretty profound, and people really had profound outcomes with that. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So I'd like to open this up to questions from our visitors. We do have a Q&A. Are you aware of any workarounds for people with macular degeneration?
You want to talk on that?
In what? I guess it would depend on the context. Is it
Yeah.
with app? Was it with app technology or?
Jennifer, if you could give a little more context, we can go with app technology for the moment. Let's go with that for the moment. I'm waiting to hear back
Okay.
from Jennifer.
All right. Mark might have, because he does a lot more app work than I do, but I think it's really going to be playing around with and working with someone or a family member or someone at a CIL on testing out different kinds of devices. So
She's saying she doesn't have a voice. So she's thinking websites without using screen reader. So without being able to voice through websites, I guess.
So without being able to speak?
Yeah, she doesn't have a voice, so.
But that's not macular degeneration.
I don't know. I'm just reading what's here. I'm a little confused.
So I would work with places like Kellogg Eye Center has a low vision center clinic, and they have a lot of test devices that people can work with. Another service that I've been using a lot lately is one called Aira, AIRA, which is sort of has it's free for a certain amount of time, and then there's a paywall, but it's a one-touch app, which doesn't require very much, if any, visual acuity. And then it connects you with a live sighted person who uses the camera on your mobile device, tablet, or glasses to help you navigate the physical world, find, decipher signage, and things like that.
I would have to agree with that. Aira is actually a really good app, and I think it's the first 5 minutes that's free, and they'll let you know when you're up, you're reaching your limit, and then some of the agents are really friendly, and they'll tell you, "Hey, call back," and then you'll have another free 5 minutes. So, it's
I believe they stopped it. They stopped it from being capped now. So it's still 5 minutes, but you can call back, where it only had like a certain amount of 5-minute capability before you couldn't, before it was a pay situation.
Yep.
So William is asking, I'm curious how to refer to, quote, normal people with a disability.
So like a language question? Tom, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So we often get the question of, someone might say, one of the things that they fear, one of the things they get nervous about is being around people with disabilities and using the wrong language or the wrong label. And so, they say, well, we've heard, it used to be handicapped, and then there was a time when it was physically challenged, and all these different terms, and people with disabilities is the current, and as they say, the appropriate terminology to use. But what do you want to be called is really what the question is, and my answer is always Tom. And I say that with humor, but I also say it with it. I say it, and then I pause, and people laugh, and then I wait for people to stop laughing, and then give them a moment to think about it. And I might repeat it and say, no, really, I want to go by Tom, and Will wants to go by Will. What do I call you? And so we want folks to sort of understand that. But I do go into the folks, I do go into the terminology of the difference between the word disability and the word disabled, at least from, someone with a disability like myself, at least from my perspective. But also, telling them a little bit about people first language and why that is, why we use people first language, and why telling the media why we don't like wheelchair bound. We're not bound to our chairs. We're not bound to our disabilities. I explain, I get out of my chair and get in bed at night. I, take a shower outside of my chair. I, do all these things without my chair. So we're not bound. And for anyone that uses a wheelchair, it's like fingernails on a chalkboard when we hear wheelchair bound. So I would say, try to treat someone with a disability the same way you treat your buddy or your other able-bodied folks, which is calling us by our name and not worrying too much about labels. But if you must, you can use the word disability. I think is pretty commonly accepted, and that's what we teach at the CIL.
Yeah, and it's always good to ask people too if you need to refer to them as, and like in a lot of different areas, there's been people have different preferences, and some people there's been a lot of movement to reclaim labels that used to be seen as derogatory, and there's divisions within the community, within communities as well over how people want to be labeled. So it's similar to gender pronouns or anything else. Just check in with the person.
I think an example of what Will is talking about is that athletes will often describe themselves and their group of athletes as CRIP athletes, or there's a new there's a documentary called CRIP Camp, and now that's also an experience for folks to experience disability. And it's such an the word cripple is such an offensive term, but it's creeping back into the language of a lot of folks with seasoned disabilities. So you have to be careful about your audience and where you're at in the language you're using, because you don't want the wrong person picking up the word crip and using it when it's not really, it's not going to be received the same way as it would around your group of folks, your group of athletes, or your group of best buddies. Mark, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you really kind of hit the nail on the head there, especially with the rise of maybe older terms coming back to be used in smaller knit groups where
Right.
and things. And we've seen that in different cultures as well, and with certain slang or languages that they may use that certain people may not be able to use,
Yeah.
Also be careful where you use crip, because you don't know which one that they might be. You never know.
So let's get into some design related questions. Anne asks, how do we get design schools to teach accessible design up front instead of as an afterthought? Any insights about that? I do know that schools are starting to put into place as part of their curriculum teaching accessibility. Any ideas?
I can talk a little bit about it just based on my experience at the University of Michigan. So when back in the day, accessibility wasn't a huge part of the curriculum at all, and it slowly became more and more integral there as it became more of like an industry wide term. And I would say that schools are pretty late to the game here when it comes to like integrating accessibility into curriculums. What I've been seeing is that they're more incorporated into development courses than UX or HCI courses. So I would recommend, if you're like looking for a little, at least like a smaller like deep dive into accessibility and you're currently a student, to take a look at some of the technology courses and the front end development courses, in addition to whatever sort of UX courses that your school offers, in order to find that exposure, because accessibility is integrated into the implementation of code. That being said, I do think that there is a very strong need for us to also design around that, so our developers have a chance to incorporate it into their code as well. I know at the University of Michigan, we had a professor named Colleen Van Lent, who was very passionate about accessibility, and the way that she tried to bring her students in exposure and increase their interest in that form was not necessarily through the curriculum itself, but through side projects. So she would provide career opportunities and link them to accessibility challenges and competitions, so that students can see like the personal investment in their own careers and their academic learning, as well as being exposed to accessibility as it relates to the industry. And what you would find is that people would go in for their own personal benefit and come out incredibly amazed at the opportunity they've been given to just have a better understanding of the disabled community and a better understanding of how they can use the skills they've learned in school to help others and to expand their worldview of who exactly they're designing for. So as we try to really advocate for accessibility at schools, I think you're going to see a lot more of those side projects. You're going to see a lot of student groups around it. And the more that students push for this, the more administrations and faculty are going to see that and respond to that through a curriculum that does put that first. But I found like the most success, at least in my personal experience, was when it was student-led. Does anyone else on the panel have any ideas about how to incorporate this into schools in more depth?
Well, I know we had a project. So former life, I was an industrial designer. And as I was getting my industrial design degree, which used to be called product design before product design was this UX UI thing, we had a project to create a ergonomic product for a one-handed user. So that was I mean, I've had exposure all throughout my life with just making friends with everybody, and I had friends who were hard of hearing and had MS and all kinds of different situations. One of my really good friends that was at my last job, she got into a severe car accident, and so she now has use of half of her body, and she does drive a vehicle, and she had to go through lots of therapy for cognitive challenges too. But yeah, doing that project in school really opened everybody's eyes. And one of the things that the professor had us do was, and I encouraged participants of this tonight to do the same thing, just to get a feel. This is one of those, not calling it an empathy lab, but situational things to kind of try to step into someone else's shoes, is to go through one day and only use, one of your hands/arms, like just try to, if you don't have a motorized toothbrush, brush your teeth with your non-dominant hand, write with your non-dominant hand, take a shower. How do you towel dry off? You have to switch to maybe using a robe, and those sorts of things that people just don't consider, and how those things change. So that really was an eye-opener, again, kind of on the same idea of what the AACIL does with those workshops, just to start to get people to understand and to think of those differences. As far as school goes, what do you all think? Ways to incorporate? I think Nisreen gave some great points for students to push it, and it will come.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing she said really resonated with me was their work with the pushing the accessibility discussion earlier in the process, or deeper into the application, so that accessibility is often left in the design process till that sort of end, till the very end. We've designed this thing and now we have to make it accessible. So how are we going to do that? But working with coders, working with, as you're prototyping, vehicles or gadgets or widgets or whatever it is you're designing, starting that conversation from the very beginning, I think is really critical. So I really appreciate that thought. Thanks.
Yeah, and someone from the chat, William, is saying, I think developing the concept of universal design is important. That's also a very good point.
Yeah, that's a very controversial subject, I think. I didn't mean to cut you off, Tom. Did you have something to say?
I was just when you say controversial, especially with the builders, but go ahead, let me hear your thought.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say that, like, a lot of times when designers bring up the concept of universal design, it's the idea that, if we just try hard enough, we can develop a system that will work for everyone. But in some ways that can be a fallacy, right? You have design systems at play that benefit certain groups of people over other groups of people, and there's no way to really reconcile both of those differences at once. And sometimes you have to realize that your design won't be for the entire audience, but you can understand that you might need two different designs to really work with everyone.
Or even possibly go beyond requirements, because requirements we usually find are pretty, minimal, and so getting folks to understand that, because when you talk about accessibility, you see builders and contractors and architects and so forth. You see the dollar signs in their eyes, thinking it's going to cost so much more to make this place accessible, etc. What's going to cost a lot is to tear it out once it's been built, and rebuild it. And we've seen that done over and over and over again, including with people that were, had fair warning from the very beginning on, look, it's not going to be right if you continue, with this design. And we all learned that with the University of Michigan, being sued by the Paralyzed Veterans admin, and I think the CIO was in on that lawsuit. But as far as when they were rebuilding their stadium, they weren't putting in the minimum amount of accessibility features, including number of seats for folks with disabilities. And the DOJ held up millions and millions of dollars of funding until they answered until they provided answers and made the plans accessible. And so many things had to be changed, and we know that it was a great loss financially for the university, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, I really appreciate that commentary about the issue. I think a lot of these sort of designs and things are done after the fact in response to lawsuits rather than being incorporated into the original design process.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was 2,236 lawsuits or something like that in 2019. It's not the way I want to design.
Right. And it often that sort of reactive, late in the process design often leads to bad design.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree. I would say like one of the ways we really try to be proactive at Quicken Loans is that we try to incorporate accessibility both in the design and the code within our design system. So then any team at Quicken Loans that uses the design system is automatically using accessible code and accessible design components. So that's one way that we try to tackle it a bit more proactively. But at the same time, there's also so many legacy systems out there that really you have to go back and rewrite things from scratch. And that is always going to be a much harder like time investment, cost investment for any company to do. And it's not just a matter of it being a lawsuit. It's a matter about doing the right thing by the people that you serve through your product. So I'd love to see like the industry change their point of view from being reactive like that to something like a lawsuit and being proactive and really thinking about who are we serving in our community and who does that include. It includes much more than people who are like you, like us. We see similar things in content, like a lot of content, a lot of people who don't work with our content writers and try to write the content themselves are writing at a 12th, 13th, 14th grade level. And a lot of times our clients just don't understand that sort of language. They don't have the same exposure to the mortgage industry than maybe like all that we do working for a mortgage company. So even when it comes to like, just like the average person who just doesn't have the same education level as us, we have to remember that the people we are serving are different, and we have to be able to provide the resources that they need just across the board.
Excellent. That's good that the company is doing that. Hopefully they're including the community in that when they're doing testing and things like that as well. So we are wrapping up here. Sorry we went over a little bit. It's a little past 8 o'clock. We appreciate all of our panelists very, very much. Participants, if you did find this valuable, feel free to make a tiny donation to the Ann Arbor Center for Independent Living. You definitely don't have to do that, but we were hoping to do something of a fundraiser, or $1 or $5 to get in the door kind of thing. But this is a virtual event, and we didn't want to put that financial burden on anybody either, especially now. We really thank you all for your time and your effort and your commitment and your advocacy, and appreciate both of our ASL interpreters for today and our participants for sticking it out and listening. And this is recorded and it will be posted, so you will have a chance if you need to reference something back. All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you so much for organizing.
Thanks for having us.
Super fun.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.